Hi everybody, I hope you're all doing really well. So today I am back to talk about A Lady's Guide to Scandal by Sophie Irwin, which is her second and most recent Regency romance, following her debut A Lady's Guide to Fortune Hunting, which I read back in 2022 and really enjoyed. So in this book we are following Eliza, the Countess of Somerset, who has recently been widowed at 27 after 10 years of marriage to a man that she didn't love. We learn quickly that 10 years prior to the events of this book, she had been in love with another man, had wanted to marry this man, but had been persuaded to give him up in order to marry the Earl of Somerset for financial and social gain. And obviously it was a socially advantageous match, but she didn't love the Earl didn't love her, he was 25 years her senior, and it wasn't a happy marriage. And so when the Earl's will is read out, Eliza is really surprised to find that her deceased husband has unexpectedly left her a fortune. He's left her this enormous bequeathment of lands which add up to £10,000 a year. However, there is a morality clause attached to this fortune. Eliza's new fortune will be relinquished if she should ever do anything to disgrace the name of the family, and that assessment of her behaviour will be at the discretion of the new Earl. Unfortunately, the new Lord Somerset happens to be the man that 10 years ago Eliza was persuaded to give up. The new Lord Somerset being the nephew of Eliza's husband, and it's clear at their reunion that he remembers their parting well and did not take his jilting very well. Further to this, Eliza's in-laws, the relatives of the former Earl, are appalled at the contents of the will, having expected that his fortune would go to them, and it's very clear that they are intrigued by this morality clause and will be keeping a close eye on Eliza and monitoring her behaviour for any whiff of scandal. Suddenly struck with the realisation that for the first time in her life she is free to do what she chooses and has the money to do so, and wishing desperately not to have to return to either her overbearing parents or have to suffer living with the new Earl at the home that she used to occupy with her husband, Eliza and her close friend and cousin Margaret decide that they are going to set off on their own to find somewhere to reside that is just their own. Somewhere that is liable to keep them entertained, but respectable enough so that Eliza can carry out her last few months of official mourning without drawing spectacle, and they decide that they are going to go to Bath. A few months of taking the waters, revitalising her wardrobe, brushing up on her artistic skills, and, making a few acquaintances is all Eliza really has in mind for her transformation into newfound independence. What she is not expecting is that she very quickly runs into the new Earl of Somerset, her former love, who seems unexpectedly anxious about her welfare and seemingly is starting to drop his prior reserve and showing behaviour that suggests that maybe he isn't quite over her and maybe they might have a second chance at love. And further to this, Eliza is definitely not expecting to meet another man, a notorious writer who ends up in all of the gossip sheets, who also appears to be taking an interest in Eliza. And I don't know if it's just that I've been a little bit out of the romance book reading loop. I've had a little bit of a romance reading drought, but I absolutely devoured this book within the space of about 24 hours. I had such a good time with this one. I thought this was really fun. This story of our main character finding her voice, taking new opportunities, and her having to recognise that she has to make the most of opportunities that she has, because not everybody in her society has them, especially in this time period and especially for women. One of my favourite characters in this was her cousin Margaret, who is very full throat with her opinions and is able to be quite a grounding voice to Eliza and also a way of snapping her out of her anxieties. Because something that I also really like about how Sophie Irwin depicts this character development for Eliza, going from being very passive, very meek and mild, to taking control of her life and becoming more independent, is how that kind of self-development is not always a linear narrative. You don't suddenly have one moment where you realise, oh, I've got to become more outgoing, and then you go forward always behaving like that. It can be very stop-start. It can be making multiple resolutions, taking a few steps forward, a few steps back whenever you come up against something that worries you. The amount of times that I've said to myself that I'm going to be more outgoing, that I'm going to do things that scare me, and then the second that I come up against resistance, I revert back to a little shell. And that does happen to Eliza many times throughout this book in a way that I feel like might frustrate some people but felt very real to me. But as I say, she always has Margaret at her side, supporting her, kind of bringing her back to earth, and also reminding her of the privileged position that she is in as somebody who has this massive fortune. She has these opportunities, but she's not taking them because she's scared, whereas Margaret, who is a poorer relation, who is also a spinster, but who has no connections and no money, she can't take those same opportunities, and right from the beginning of the book kind of tells Eliza off and pulls her up on where she's falling short, and I thought that was really well done. I feel like whether or not you're going to like this book is very dependent on your feelings of Persuasion by Jane Austen. This is, as you might imagine from the plot, very heavily inspired by Persuasion, and in fact there is a little epigraph right at the beginning which comes directly from Persuasion. She had been forced into prudence in her youth. She learned romance as she grew older, the natural sequel of an unnatural beginning. But knowing that right from the beginning, that this story is playing with persuasion might actually trip you up a bit when it comes to the plot itself. And I can imagine quite a few people getting frustrated with this book if you, 1, love Persuasion, 2, particularly you love Captain Wentworth, and 3, you don't enjoy romance books that include love triangles and any kind of cheating, whether it is emotional or physical. Because the love triangle in this is very, very strong and may not necessarily go the way that you think it's going to. For myself, I don't love a love triangle, but I don't hate them. And what I liked about this book was that I actually, for a good chunk of this book, did not know who I should be rooting for. Because I think the characterizations of both love interests are really strong. They are two very different men, and Sophie Irwin is able to build up both of their personalities so that they are both likeable but have clear flaws, different aspects of Eliza's personality that they appeal to. In one chapter with one of them you can be really rooting for them, but then you switch to a chapter with the other love interest and you're like, oh, but I like him as well. And so I could completely understand why Eliza was conflicted. Then I would say that around about 2/3 of the way through the book it then becomes quite clear who her guy should be. But there are still twists and turns in this book that make you genuinely worry and think, oh, I don't know how this romance book, which has a very clear set ending, is going to go. I was panicked, I didn't know. I will say there were a couple of plot twists or plot points in this book which I did guess quite early on. One of which is quite a big one, is actually about one of our love interests. And you would think that knowing that plot point or guessing that plot twist quite early on would have ruined the book for me and ruined its momentum. But actually, because Sophie Irwin is so good at her characterization, she made me kind of put to bed that speculation that I had. Therefore, when the plot twist came, I'd forgotten about it and was actually genuinely shocked and surprised. And there are also other plot twists that she peppers in that I didn't see coming, which were really nice, but all which made sense with the narrative that she had built so far. So I thought it was very well done. And I think the ultimate message with this love triangle and of this book itself is how love is about growing with a person, understanding and accepting that people do change over time. You have to be able to meet them where they are now, but also accept that they are going to grow and change over time and be willing to go on that journey with them. And I thought that was really lovely. Alongside that, you've got this story of Eliza coming into her own, cultivating her independence, becoming more confident and less of a wallflower. So for me, it feels like it's a combination of Persuasion by Jane Austen, One True Loves by Taylor Jenkins Reid, because you've got the main love interest kind of torn between two men who offer very different things, particularly with one of those love interests representing her past, as well as The Blue Castle by Ellen Montgomery, with this main character being in her late 20s and having to learn independence and how to be herself. Those three books all mixed together with your general Regency romance fare, which was very enjoyable for me. As I say, if you are a big fan of Persuasion and you don't really want that story messed with, then this might not be for you. I can definitely imagine who this would not appeal to. And particularly if you do get frustrated with quite passive characters, I can completely understand why Eliza, particularly at the beginning of this book, might frustrate some people. If you want your characters to be very bolshy, to be very opinionated, she's definitely not that. And I think you can definitely see that there is a progression she's going to go on, but I know exactly the kind of reader who would look at her at the beginning and just think, oh god, how insipid. For myself, I felt very seen by her. I could completely relate to it, but I know that that is not for everyone. So yeah, for myself, as somebody who does relate to a wallflower who, you know, I like Persuasion, but Persuasion is honestly my least favourite of Jane Austen's novels, and a lot of that is to do with my dislike of Captain Wentworth. I personally really enjoyed this. I actually thought it developed that kind of story in a way that is unique to itself, but does actually slightly, in some ways, improve on its source material. I personally had a really great time with this book. Another tiny little nitpick that I have for this book is that right near the beginning of the story, we are setting up our characters, getting to know some of the secondary and background characters that we will come to know in Bath. And right in the middle of one of these characters talking, this man is expressing sympathy for Eliza and her loss of her husband. And he says, "May I express my very great sorrow for your loss, my lady. Though we artists are all true empaths, I still cannot imagine how you are feeling." And anybody who, like me, has seen the 2022 Persuasion probably recoiled a little bit in their seat at the word empath being used in this Regency romance. And I can only presume that this is a deliberate reference to 2022 Persuasion, rather than Sophie Irwin thinking that this is genuinely a word that was used in 1819, because, spoiler, it was not. It is very much a 20th century word. And that is what I'm presuming. I presume it is, like, tongue-in-cheek, a clear reference to the film, but it did catch me off guard and kind of took me out of the book a little bit. And I feel like Sophie Irwin's history is generally quite good for this time period. She doesn't throw in so many anachronisms, but yeah, caught me off guard. So there we go, that's my little review for A Lady's Guide to Scandal by Sophie Irwin. Do let me know if you've read this book. Alternatively, please let me know of any romance books that you've been reading recently that you really enjoyed. I would love to hear from you. I hope you're having a fantastic day, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks. Bye.